It's just the cost of doing business.
I can be an executive of a Fortune 500 drug company, and I can acquire FDA approval for an agent that may kill people. I can know that there are going to be a certain number of people who will die from this drug. I can introduce it into the market, have those people die. I can never have to answer personally for that decision, even if I violate federal law, even if I commit fraud, even if I violate the rules of the agency. I can still count on the FDA not to hurt my company. I can still count on the FDA to accept a small pittance of the profits that I make from my products in order to continue to do business.
Unlike any other industry in the United States, pharmaceutical companies can literally get away with murder.
Pharmaceutical companies maintain control of the data collected in the clinical trials. They conceal the harm by not publishing the cases where there were bad events, whether it's deaths or heart attacks. Whatever is an adverse event, which means a risk for anyone taking the drug, they cover it up as if it didn't happen. They don't publish it.
So what has happened over the last several decades is that the pharmaceutical industry in particular has become the #1 cause of disease and death in America by poisoning people, essentially, with its toxic chemicals, by weakening people's immune systems and weakening their liver, weakening their neurological functions so that they become future revenue-generating patients.
About half of all of the drugs that are approved for public distribution are quietly recalled within about 5 years because they're too dangerous.
Vioxx has killed at least 60,000 Americans. It caused about 130,000 excess cases of heart attack and strokes. It's one of the most lethal drugs ever approved because it was used by so many people.
The FDA commissioner, looking at his medical reviewers, refused to remove that drug from the market. Then FDA Commissioner Lester Crawford stood by Merck and defended that drug. He also believed that the drug was appropriate for use in pediatric rheumatoid arthritis patients. So he approved it for kids.
The total sales of Vioxx over its period of time it was allowed on the market was over $11 billion. And they had to pay the federal government a $950 million fine. They've paid out about $4 billion in settlements to the victims of Vioxx. But the company is way ahead of the game in their fraudulent marketing of Vioxx.
There are many other drugs that can fall into the category of unsafe drugs that have been approved. Bextra, for example, had heart toxicity risks and ultimately was removed from the market because of those risks, but for many, many years, the FDA kept it on the market.
The company making Bextra, again, covered up the lethal dangers, and they promoted it for uses that it never should have been used for, such as post-surgical pain relief.
Statin drugs have been approved despite the fact that at the time the FDA convened its medical panel, review panel on the statin drugs, the panel at first refused to approve the drug. Well, the unfortunate reality of the drugs is that they block production of an essential energy enzyme, coenzyme Q10, which can lead to heart failure. So here we have, again, a situation where a drug has been approved to lower your risk of heart abnormalities that in the end can contribute to heart fatalities.
Katic. It is a drug used as an antibiotic. There's plenty of other antibiotics out there, but Katic, that one caused severe liver damage. FDA had a hint that there was liver damage before the approval, but they approved it anyway. What's really frightening is the clinical study that was done to validate the safety of Katic never occurred. It was done at a clinical research facility that was closed at the time that the alleged study was conducted. But Katic did get approved, and as a result, it killed a lot of people, destroyed their livers, necessitated liver transplants, thereby ruining people's lives. It was something that never should have been allowed on the market, eventually was withdrawn, but it never should have been approved in the first place.
There's one drug, Tracelol. Tracelol was used during heart surgery to prevent some bleeding, to control bleeding. And when they finally found that Tracelol killed about 1,000 people per month, the drug company actually went to a very famous Harvard professor and tried to drown him in money to schmooze things over. Well, the man was so disgusted with that approach, he went public, and Tracelol was taken off the market all over the world. But guess what? Only in the US, the FDA issued a warning. Well, how could we interfere with drug company profits?
Tracelol's withdrawal was delayed for 2 years because the company did everything possible to keep it on the market. They were charging $1,000 per injection. They wanted as many people to be on this drug for as long as possible so they could continue making outrageous profits.
Most of these really terrible drugs are prescribed chronically. They're tested 6 weeks, but they're taken year after year, and that's buildup. When a drug has toxicity, it builds up. Diabetes doesn't happen overnight, although it is frightening the fast speed at which children become diabetic from antipsychotics.
There are several psychotic drugs or antipsychotic drugs that the FDA keeps on the market, despite increased risks of suicidality and despite a substantial amount of evidence of birth defects associated with them. And there's Paxil, Zoloft, Fexor. These drugs and many others that are like them that are serotonin reuptake inhibitors have been shown to lack efficacy. The British health authorities banned the substance for children and for young adults. And in the United States, instead, the best that could be done was a black box warning, so that here in our country, we still make these drugs available to youth and increase the risk of suicidality as a result.
If they had honestly told, GlaxoSmithKline had told parents, say, that what we now know, that taking Paxil is 8 times more likely to cause somebody to commit suicide than taking a sugar pill in the clinical trials, which they knew before the drug was even approved. If you were to tell a parent that, they're not about to give their kid that drug.
This is 911. Who is this? Where is your sister? What is she trying to do? Take pills?
Avandia increases the risk of heart attack. And as a general heart toxin, it has been condemned in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. Despite that fact, FDA's own scientific review panel held it to be a heart toxin. Commissioner Hamburg decided that she would keep it on the market, available to those who are currently using it for precisely those people who are at the greatest risk of a heart attack or other heart abnormality arising from the drug.
Accutane. That was an acne drug that was supposed to be given only in the most severe cases of acne because it was known it had side effects. It caused severe birth defects. They denied that it caused people to commit suicide, but it did. But they were able to keep the warning off of that for many, many years. One congressman, Bart Stupak from Michigan, his son committed suicide at 17. Now these are kids, they weren't diagnosed with depression, they weren't diagnosed with any mental disorder, and they take this acne drug and they commit suicide. And so the drug companies know this, but the FDA knows it too.
When one of the producers of fractionated blood products intended for hemophiliacs realized that their product would kill people because it was contaminated with HIV, you would expect that Baxter would have destroyed the product. They didn't. With the encouragement of the FDA, they sold the product in Europe to hemophiliacs there and infected children with HIV.
this company positively, absolutely knew that they had a medication that was infected with the AIDS virus, they took the product off the market in the U.S. and then they dumped it in France, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. So they made a huge profit. By the way, Joe, government officials in France that allowed that to happen actually had to go to prison for it. In America, not one corporate executive for this company has been indicted or even criminally investigated by our Justice Department.
Why not?
And if you've ever wondered why a terminally ill cancer patient is given lots of chemotherapy almost up until the point that they're dying or dead, it's because the economic incentive is there to continue putting chemotherapy into cancer patients who have no chance whatsoever of benefiting from it. In each and every case when we tried to recruit a mainstream oncologist, the question they asked us is, what is your chemotherapy bonus structure? I was unaware of this back in the year 2000. I asked them, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, our pay is based on how much chemotherapy we prescribe. That's where our profit center is. And if we don't have a strong chemotherapy reimbursement incentive, we'll find a cancer center that will give us a strong chemotherapy bonus.
Nine-tenths of all laws made by the United States are not the product of those we elect who work here, but the product of those who inhabit the Independent Regulatory Commission, who are unelected, unaccountable to the courts, the Congress, the American people.
It's interesting that in the Declaration of Independence, they listed the acts of tyranny by King George III. It was stated that King George has created a multitude of new offices and sent swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Now I ask you, what is the difference between King George and what he was doing to the citizens of this country and what the U.S. regulatory agencies are doing to them today? And the correct answer to that question is there is no difference.
The system is so broken that it can't be repaired. It can be pressed. It can be shaped by serious amounts of pushback. But ultimately, if we're going to protect our lives and our health, we have to completely redo the system. Right now, the regulated industries, food and drugs, totally control the regulatory process.
Just as Mahatma Gandhi walked to the ocean, Japan, for his own salt, to violate the British Crown's salt monopoly, so we need to grow organic food, bring raw milk across state lines for our own use and for the use of those who want it, demand the right to trade in natural products.
Well, the question always arises what to do. Should we write our congressman about the transgressions of the FDA? Of course. Make some noise. The only thing I believe that will save this country is for the executive and the legislative branches of government that have power, use that power to dismantle or strictly eliminate the illegal activities of these regulatory agencies.
We're not going to solve the problem by incremental reforms. The system is too corrupt from top to bottom. We're going to have a mass uprising, hopefully mainly nonviolent, of the citizens of this country. I think we're going to have allies all over the world when we do this. We're going to have a second American Revolution because we do not have a democracy. And the type of authoritarian system that we're living under right now is not just a threat to our economic livelihood. This is a threat to our lives, a threat to our children, our grandchildren. This is a threat to human civilization and the fragile web of life on Earth. It's a matter of life and death.
It is the rule rather than the exception that abuses take place. And that's why we're killing our country. That's why our country is in such dire straits. And we won't be able to save this nation unless these scoundrels are eliminated and unless people come into office to replace them who are dedicated to serving this country more than they are in serving themselves.
When we call Congress, we have a couple 100,000 grassroots activists, when they call Congress and talk about these issues, they need to be well informed and understand what it is that they're talking about. So the most important thing that people can do is educate themselves, get the facts straight, and get in touch with those that really can help to push our agenda in Congress and otherwise.
And one of you? Two of you? No. Millions of you? Yes. How do we get millions of you? Because you send out the action item to your friends. Click, click, click. We call it riding the freedom mouse. And when the globalists, when the regulators, when the industrialists are faced with that kind of pushback, they step back every time.
Simply pointing out the illegality and the tyranny of the actions of these regulatory agencies affects nothing. We need to put pressure on our elected officials in Congress and in the White House to put restraints upon these regulatory agencies. That's the only thing that will save us.
Citizens, even if they don't know this, we have the ability to pass our own laws. In large numbers of municipalities and counties, we have the ability to fire these corrupt politicians. It's called recall.
These things are happening. It's not a question of whether we're debating about whether people have sold the country down the river in order to benefit themselves. They have done it.
And we're seeing a situation in which reform right now is really essential. Well, now there's a series of bills that would literally change health and food freedom and justice in this country. It's important to remember that there are people in Congress who are willing to challenge the FDA.
The public has got to keep their congressmen reminded. They have to remind their congressmen that they're not going to tolerate legislation being passed or FDA rules being put into effect that deny them access to their dietary supplements. It's an ongoing battle. It just doesn't stop with one victory.
Basically, you have legislation by default. To downsize the government, the Administrative Procedures Act needs to be amended so that the final application of any new regulation needs to be actually approved by an actual vote of Congress.
What we need is a regulatory system where the drug manufacturers are penalized both in terms of fines and in terms of responsible people going to jail.
We actually take these executives from drug companies to court. We actually require that new drugs are more effective than older drugs. And when we have some nutritional factors that play a key role in the prevention of diseases, that government should step in and finance research.
The movement needs to get better organized. The FDA, they got teams. They're organized, they got all this information, and everyone else is disorganized because they're isolated here and there, and they don't communicate. There's no central battle to plan a counterattack against this.
We're going to have a second revolution down the road, but we need to start getting organized and very strategic about it right now. Two sectors of the movement need to come together. One of them is the alternative health sector, the people who see very closely how Big Pharma and the FDA are a serious threat to public health, to our survival. And the others are it's the movement for alternative food and farming. Once we come together, we have millions of people. We have the capacity to enact our own laws. We have the capacity, if we need to raise millions of dollars in statewide campaigns.
Consumers have to let their voice be heard so that the hundreds of billions of dollars that the drug companies earn every single year does not allow them to perpetuate a monopoly on the healthcare system.
I'm a lawyer, I'm used to the courtroom, and to be able to win a case because thousands of people lend and show public support is just one of the best feelings. I mean, that is making the system work, and we need help.
We all need to come together and increase our ranks because we really need to build an army.
Just going to Congress, we're not even getting results. We need to confront our oppressors directly and then get the attention of the national news media. But, you know, this has to be well organized.
When we think carefully and when we stand their process on its head and use it to our advantage, we prevail.
Here we are today with the greatest threat coming not from foreign foes, but from domestic ones, but who are actually filling the elected offices of the United States government and also the unelected ones. So it is our duty to reassert our sovereignty, to take back the power and the ability that we once had to ensure that those rights are protected once again.
Our country was founded to protect the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They didn't give them the mechanism to where a president and a Congress can merely pass a law that is more powerful than the Bill of Rights or the Constitution. No, they said you had to jump through hoops. You have to amend the Constitution to change it, which we all know is probably a 10-year process at the most. They wanted to make it difficult to do that. And yet we blindly now are passing laws that render the Constitution and the Bill of Rights worthless documents. And I think that's where the trouble comes in. We're not following the official documents of how our country is to run. And if you don't do that, then what do you stand for?
There's really only one answer. Why do you sell your government away? Why do you sell the rights of people away? Why do you abandon this country? Well, you do it because you're a traitor. Because you value yourself more than your country. Because you value your own economic future more than you do the welfare of the American people.
The only reason that things don't change is because we didn't become activated enough to cause them to change. But it's our planet, it's our health, it's our future, and it's our choice.
We are the people.
You will not take our rights, you will not take our liberties, and we will not let this stand. Give us liberty or give us death.